Hello everybody and welcome to another episode here at the Desert Tiger Podcast. I am your host here on the DTP. My name is Colton G. How are you guys doing today? I am fantastic and I'm about to tell you why. That's because my guest today on this episode is Derek Sharp, current lead singer of the Guess Who. Of course, before we get into my conversation with Derek today, I want to go ahead and thank all of you who went and checked out last week's episode that happened to feature the Juno-nominated Monster Truck. I had a great time talking to the group's bassist and lead singer, John Harvey, all about their latest album, True Rockers. If you guys missed that, you can find it plus a ton of other great interviews with amazing guests in the DTP archives. The Guess Who are probably, who am I fooling probably? The Guess Who are one of the biggest bands in Canadian rock and roll history, and Derek Sharp has been fronting the band for over a decade, playing some of the group's most treasured, most classic tracks in front of thousands upon thousands of people. American Woman, No Sugar Tonight, Laughing, No Time, Hand Me Down World, classics that have been passed down from generation of music fans. Along with the rest of the Guess Who, Derek has been allowing people all over the world to relive their memories that these timeless classics have created, as well as create new memories, and that's exactly what the Guess Who is doing. They recently released a new album, their first album since 1995, the first major release, and it is entitled The Future Is What It Used to Be. And Derek is joining me today to talk all about that new album, how the group came to the decision to write new music after so long of playing the classics. We're going to talk about how Rudy Sarzo, that's right, one of the greatest bass players in rock and roll hard rock history, how Rudy ended up coming in to join the band, what he brought to the recording process and everything else. Exactly what recording process did they go through? The band tried to recapture as much of the classic Guess Who sound as they possibly could, and I believe that that came through. You're going to hear a couple of the songs here on today's episode, and you're also going to hear about how they went into the studio and went about recapturing that classic Guess Who sound that you all know and love. We're going to be discussing all of this with Derek today, as well as some of the other things that he did in the music industry. He has been playing music professionally for well over 20 years, so there is a lot of history for us to jump into, and of course there is the entire future of the Guess Who, and how the band, as long as they still have Gary Peterson, the group's original drummer, they still plan on putting rubber to the road, playing shows wherever the wind blows, and of course creating new memories for fans worldwide, because the future is what it used to be. Because maybe you were like me, maybe you were like Derek Sharp, staying up late right by that record button on the AM or the FM, waiting for your favorite songs to come playing on the radio.
Oh, we used to hang around the main street diner, admiring the fancy car that we arrived in. We never really
The Desert Tiger Podcast.
We are here with Derek Sharp, current lead singer of The Guess Who. He has played with numerous different musicians all over. How is it going today, Derek?
I'm pretty fantastic. How are you?
I am fantastic myself.
Awesome. Of course you are.
How can't I complain, man? I'm talking to somebody who's gigging around with The Guess Who. I mean, at this point, as an interviewer for myself and also as a Canadian, that's pretty significant.
I love how you use the term gigging around, because it's like a term out of another time to me now, this gigging around thing. You know, I would say with depending on what you're doing and what level you're at, some people will call it touring, or or how I would put it would be traveling a lot to play a little bit. You get paid to travel.
Yeah, you see a lot of highway.
And in our band, because we do a lot of one-offs and we live in all four corners of North America, it takes a bit of juggling to get us into one place.
I can only imagine.
Right. So it's to do one show, it's 3 days of nonsense to have fun for 90 minutes. Living the dream, buddy.
Yeah, got to make it just as much worthwhile as you can. Pack as much fun in that 90 minutes as possible.
Yeah, exactly.
We were talking about earlier where you came from Ontario, what is now Thunder Bay, moved to Toronto. Mm-hmm. So where does the music life start for one Derek Sharp?
Well, the short version is I declared to my mother when I was 5 or 6 years old that I was gonna play music the rest of my life, not knowing how I was gonna do it. I think it was, the music of that time, like the Beatles were just breaking up, and there was a lot of great music on the radio, and I was like, and we'd go on family trips, and songs would come on, and I was like, I want to do this. So when I was 10, I begged them to buy me a guitar. They got me a guitar. It sat there for about 6 months, and then I figured out how to play it on my own. I tried to learn it by a book, but that didn't work. So I looked at the pictures of the chords where you put your fingers, and I just figured it out from there. So I started when I was 10, and I started playing professionally when I was about 15. And I've been on the road ever since.
Yeah, 15 is pretty impressive, I would say. I mean, especially coming from like my generation where most people don't even like have a clue as to what they want to do by then.
That's a solid point, and I agree with you. What's your generation, by the way?
Well, I am 28.
Oh, okay. I get it. Yeah. So the whole scene that I experienced, it was long gone by the time you hit it. In other words, if you wanted to be a musician 15 years ago or 10 years ago, it was a weekend thing, pretty much, right?
Yes.
Okay, so segue to, when I started, my first gig, a paying gig, was in a wedding band. Somebody hired me to do it. And then, of course, we had to be old enough to play in the bars. And some of us lied. But the point is you could play 6 to 7 nights a week if you wanted to. You just had to be willing to, be in a van and stay in shitty band rooms with each other and be in very close quarters for long periods of time. And if you were up for it, then, yeah, you could play. And that's how you really learn how to do it, It's not glamorous.
Oh, without a doubt. And at any point starting out normally isn't. You have to earn your chops and get some experience.
Yeah. The good thing about being that age, you don't really care. I would have been happy playing and I did, playing some of the shittiest places you can imagine, But it's good. It's all good. And it's training ground for what's to come.
Well, definitely. Mm-hmm. When you're that age, sleeping on the floor doesn't nearly affect your back or your ego nearly as much as it maybe would.
Your ego,
later
yeah.
on.
You're exactly right. Because now you couldn't pay me to do that. And not that I don't want to do it. I just, I'm too accustomed to, the Holiday Inn and Westons and whatnot, i.e. a bed.
Yes.
Yeah, I guess. But, I'm still here playing music, and I always say to my pals that, if you just stick it out, you'll be okay. You're going to go through a bit of a roller coaster ride, but those of us who don't quit end up coming out the other side.
As a young man going forward, playing in wedding bands, how do you get forward in the music industry towards achieving the dreams you had as a 5-year-old child?
First of all, the wedding band thing only happened a couple of times because that wasn't for me. I wanted to be in a rock band, and that was my first paying gig. It was a way to make money.
Yeah.
But generally, I played in a rock band, and we, in a garage band like everybody else, and we'd write our own songs, and we sucked pretty bad, but everybody learned together. And then, over time, you meet people, you hang out and you network, and that's how you get your name around. And then all of a sudden, one day, something comes up and somebody asks you to do this, and it leads you to the next level, to the next level, to the next level. Does that sound right?
Oh, definitely.
Everybody has a different version of the story, but I think overall it's the same. It's the same story.
Were you first touring as a session musician, or were you playing in your own bands, like once you first started breaking out into the touring and recording scenes?
Yeah, I had my own band, and then we mostly played top 40 cover bands, and we'd slip our originals in because that's how you worked. I did start doing some sessions when I got a little bit older, into my 20s, but that's a different skill set, But I did stuff like that. But I didn't start touring, on a major scale with profile bands till I was about maybe in my mid to late 20s. I played with Red Rider for a couple of years, and then it led to something else, to something else, to something else. So I rather than bore you with who I've played with in my whole life, because the list is long. But I've been, very fortunate and lucky in some ways, but I've also, worked pretty hard to get to where I was. So, and it's been great, and all of that led me into the Guess Who in 2008. I guess is where we're going here.
Yeah.
So by that time, in 2008, I was 40. I was older. I was in my early 40s, 43 or whatever I was, and somebody had just recommended me, because they were in a position where they needed a singer, and so there wasn't really any audition process per se, and I did a few shows thinking it was going to be temporary, and I'm still here almost 11 years later.
When you got brought in, was there a very long practice process, considering you didn't have much of an audition period? No. I had 5 days to prepare and learn all the words, which I did, and memorize their show. They sent me a video of what they did. Okay. And some things, and we rehearsed the vocals in the dressing room before the show, and then we went on. Oh, wow.
It was crazy. It was crazy. I'm a runner, so I'd be running every day. It wasn't so much the guitar and the music part. It was learning all the words of the songs that I didn't know, and some of them are very wordy. It was trying to, make sure I memorize them, because when you're out there, the front man in the band, it's not like you can throw up a music stand and read or use a teleprompter or something like that, like they do on TV. It was just, it was fun. It's kind of nice doing things like that because it's exciting. You're scared shitless, and that doesn't happen very often after you've been playing for 100 years. You don't get that that fear feeling anymore that you used to when you were a kid, you know. So that was kind of nice.
Yeah, I can only imagine that rush and the butterflies that would come back after just years of being like, what is this feeling?
I know. And the funny thing is, it didn't dawn on me till I'd done a few shows that I was playing with these two guys that were, you know, had been playing since before I was even born, you know, in their band. So they were legendary to me.
That's actually another thing I have to ask as well is, how did they embrace you
I don't
into
know.
the
You'd
band?
have to ask them, but they probably thought I was some young little snot. You know what I mean? Or I'm trying to equate it to how I would see somebody 20 years younger than me, which is, I guess, you, right? You know, even though I don't know you. But the thing with getting older is there's a lot of life experience that comes with that. And to watch other people go through something that you went through years before is almost like, oh, okay, here we go. Even though it's never the same experience, but that's how you feel. You feel like you've been there and done that. So I imagine that they looked at me with a little in that way a little bit. Even though like those two guys were, you know, they're musicians in a band. They weren't fronting it, you know, because that's a whole other thing, being the front man of the show. But to be in a legendary band for that long is a rare occurrence. You know, how many bands can you name that have been around 58 years?
It's not very many at all, especially throughout Canadian rock and roll
or anywhere,
or just music
you
in general.
You got the Rolling Stones and who else? I can't even think of one.
It's really hard to attempt to even think of one, because so many bands have just had those issues or problems, and it is to have been going from the 60s on, like through the earlier name changes in the beginning of the band,
and are still alive. Because think about it, that's 58 years just being in a band. So you would assume that you were already 18 to 20 years old when you started that. Add on to that the musician's life of touring and eating crappy food and, you know, and drugs and alcohol and whatnot. You know, you wonder why a lot of people don't survive it. Yeah, yet in our band, there's, you know, the Gary's, well, I mean, Gary's the only one left, but some of the other members are still out there playing, you know, like Bachman, he's out there doing his solo thing. Cummings does his solo thing. You know, a couple of the guys have died. A couple of the guys don't play anymore. I look at it like the Guess Who is a Canadian institution. Does that make sense?
I actually would agree with that. It makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. Definitely, you can't pinpoint it. It's not like the Beatles where it was just 4 people and that was it, and there was never anybody else. They have so many different lineups, and they've had success with those different lineups. So, and really, when I started, it wasn't something we had entertained, because at that point we were just playing the hit, you know, all the songs that everybody knew. But as members changed through my tenure, it just became more evident that, you know, as time went on, that maybe this is something we should do, because we're now a band now. It takes a while for a band to turn into a band. Do you know what I mean by that? You know, you can get the best musicians in the world, throw them on a stage, and they won't sound as good as Cheap Trick, who have been together for 40 odd years. You know, because it takes time to develop into one.
No, those personal relationships and building that band relationship takes time, and especially if you're changing members, it sometimes takes time to build and accept that new dynamic.
And it's counterproductive when you keep going through different people. And I understand that, and I think that's why a lot of, you know, the biggest challenge of being an older band, and you could apply this to any of them out there, through new membership or whatever, for whatever reason whatsoever. You can't get, it's hard to get that thing going unless you spend enough time doing it. And time, as you know, when you get older, is not on your side.
Unfortunately not. It's you seem to think it's going to last forever, and then suddenly days start to go by a lot faster.
Oh my God, tell me about it. Like when somebody pointed out that I'd been the longest serving singer in the band as of sometime this year, I was like, you fucking kidding me, really? And you look back, yeah, I guess nobody was in it for more than 10 years.
Wow.
And just like that, I'm going on 11.
That's pretty incredible. It almost stands to state that you guys almost had to record an album then.
Well, there's a lot of reasons for that, but mainly it was because we felt we had good enough material to do that. And that was the biggest challenge, was, first of all, writing songs that could even be in the same sentence as some of those great old songs. And challenge number one is they're great songs. Yes. Challenge number two is they've been played 5 million times on radio, and they're ubiquitous in our society in classic rock. Everybody knows them. Even if they don't know them, they know them. Right? So you're starting out, let's say it's you. You put out a record. You're trying to get people to hear it. You put it on Spotify. How long is it going to take before people listen to it enough that you get the same effect, if at all? So challenge number one is come up with material that you feel is at least sort of in the ballpark, right? That said, we purposely wrote and recorded it in a way that it would sound like something out of 40 years ago. That was our agenda. So
by saying that, do you mean like you used the same equipment that you would have used like 40 years ago?
Yeah.
Or like...
Yeah. Some. Well, I mean, even my own studio, most of my equipment is vintage because I'm vintage. So I've had these amps and stuff for years and years, and old guitars, But we did record. We went into Blackbird Studios in Nashville to record the drums. We used vintage kits. We did it on a console. We did everything we could to kind of simulate. If simulate's the right word, but or mimic how you would have done it back then. Only the big difference is when you're 20 years old and you're doing a record, you're 20 years old. We have, Rudy Sarzo's 60. He's just turned 68. Gary Peterson's 73. I'm in my almost mid-50s. And you're talking about people that have had a lifetime of experience. So you add that into the mix. If it doesn't sound a little more mature, then something's wrong. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Definitely.
So I found that we were a lot, because of everybody's experience, it was a lot tighter and a lot more. If there's any modern sound to what we did, it would be because of the experience of the players, even though the music itself, musically and lyrically and sonically is vintage, in my opinion. Have you listened to it at all?
Yes, I have. I actually listened to it this morning when I was walking my dog.
Mm-hmm. And what would your assessment be based on what I just told you?
It definitely does fit like a lot of that classic feel, but it definitely does feel like a lot more matured. It still has a lot more of the same lyrical feelings and vibes behind like the love, like approaching it and everything else, and the rock and roll lifestyle, but it still is like, it is a much more matured version of like what you would expect from something like that.
Yeah. I mean, because you can only do what you can do at the point in your life that you're at. And that's where we're at. But, and also Jim Scott mixed it, and if you know who he is, if you don't know who he is, you can Google him, because he's been responsible for almost, some of the greatest records of our time. And that had a huge hand into getting to where we wanted to be sonically.
Yeah.
With the record. We've been getting pretty much positive reviews about the thing. We've done 3 videos the one video now has been nominated for 4 or 5 independent awards, and we've won 2 of them, including Best Actor.
Really?
Which I just find infinitely amusing because, you know, I'm certainly not an actor, and I'm not going to give up my day job anytime soon. But either way, it was really due to the fella that came up with the video concept and his crew. It was an excellent video, and it deserved the awards it got, just mainly based on their efforts.
Yeah.
You know, in my opinion. Yeah, people like the song and everything, but they did an amazing job.
Is that for the video for playing on the radio?
Nope, that's for Haunted.
Okay.
Haunted, it's been getting the most miles. Playing on the Radio was the first one we put out back in July, and that was done by Nigel Dick. And if you don't know who he is, he basically did all the huge videos in the 80s and 90s, Britney Spears and Guns N' Roses. And he just happened to be in Las Vegas when we were. So we shot the video with him, which was a wonderful experience because that guy, you know, has huge credentials. But we put that one out first because it just seemed to set up what we were trying to go for. I mean, lyrically, that song, playing on the radio, it was a throwback, you know, and it had such a catchy chorus in the opinion of everybody that was making the decisions that we put that out. You know, we didn't want to lead off with a ballad. But with Haunted, instead of a performance-based video, he wanted to do a short film.
Yeah.
And that's how that turned out, and that's why I think it's been getting these nominations and awards for these independent, so far, film festivals.
That's really cool. I haven't actually watched the video myself. Can you take me through it a bit?
Yeah, check it out. I mean, I guess on the Facebook or website, there's probably a link to it. The director had a story that went with the song, which was somewhat accurate to the to the song itself. However, it was a bit, you know, he had his own version of the story, and I just went with it. And he hired a couple of actors, and it was basically about a young boy who's sitting with his mom reading with her, and he finds out that she's sick and she's going to die. And the whole thing kind of goes from there. And in the video, the little boy is playing me, who's the adult version of the boy. And in the video, you see the band playing as well. Check it out. It's been getting a lot of, what do you guess, hits, streams, whatever. It's getting the most action for us, possibly due to the awards and stuff like that. I'm not sure because I don't follow the statistics. It's just a lot of people talk about it to me. So, you know.
All right, I'm definitely going to have to check that out for sure.
Yeah, baby.
Yeah. So,
see Best Actor, Derek Sharp.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, God. Don't give up your day job.
Well, I mean, at least you know if somehow music takes a turn for the worst or somehow doesn't pan out even though it totally has, you can totally fall back on your acting credentials, Derek. And of course, I want to ask you a lot more about this new album, The Future Is What It Used to Be. We're going to get into that again right away soon, but we're going to take a quick break. We're going to be playing another track off the album for the listeners here on the podcast. But before we go and do that, I want to go and thank those of you who have went ahead and followed some of our Desert Tiger playlists over on Spotify. We have the Canuck Rock Potluck, and you can actually go and find Playing on the Radio on that playlist. We also have the Great Rhymed North, which is our rap playlist. We also have 2 other playlists we're going to be rolling out later this week, so keep your guys' eyes open on our social media platforms so that you can know what they're named, know when they drop, know where to find them, and you can go ahead and follow them. And wait. You're not following Desert Tiger on social media, but don't you guys know that that is the best, the easiest way to stay up to date with what is happening here at the podcast? Whether that be new guests, new merch, live shows that I'm going to be promoting, and I actually am hoping to live stream some of those shows to Twitch later on this year, so you know that the first place that you guys are going to find out about that is the Desert Tiger social media, because the episodes only drop on Thursdays. So if you guys want to be in the loop before that, head over to our Facebook, our Twitter, our Instagram, give us a follow, send me a message saying how much you love the show, maybe pick up a Desert Tiger shirt, because that is the super extra way that you can support the show. I am working on a Patreon right now for those of you who want to support the show that extra little mile. But for right now, if you want to go ahead and rep the Desert Tiger podcast up and down the street with everybody that you meet, you can go ahead and pick up a t-shirt. I would be forever in your debt, and we'll either phone call you or write you a personal hand note with some lovely stickers stuffed inside there as well. And of course, if you want to, you can go ahead and do the free thing, which is share your favorite episode. Maybe it's this episode right here that you're listening to right now on your pages with your family and your friends, because you don't know how much it helps this show grow. And maybe this is your favorite episode. Maybe listening to Derek talk about playing all these classic Guess Who songs is starting to bring back some memories of when we were young.
the Desert Tiger Podcast.
At what point did you guys decide you wanted to start writing the new album? Was this something that began during the process during your 10 years, or was this something that happened more recently?
Well, it kind of goes in two parts. Gary Peterson is an avid music fan. He, at 73 years old, he still listens to music all the time. So that said, sometimes him and I'd sit around, just listen to music we liked or whatever. And he had heard one of my songs that I'd done previously, and he said, we should maybe do this song. And I said, well, why don't we just try and, write ones with the band in mind? So, of course, I was always a little leery of presenting something that wasn't going to be great. So I worked at it for a while, and I came up with playing on the radio. That's how the whole thing started. And the song sat around for a little while because, getting us to record, when you're not living in the same place, it's a challenge, and it's expensive. So I ended up writing, I think, 3 or 4 songs, and we started to rehearse 3 of them. And we recorded a version of them, and then as time went on, a couple of members changed, and it wasn't really we didn't really have any focus yet, right? So that all changed when we got Will in the band, who was recommended to me from Tommy Shaw, because he had worked with Shaw Blades and on Tommy's, who Tommy Shaw is, right?
Yes.
From Styx. Okay, so I'm just making sure.
Of course.
So, and he and Will had produced the Bluegrass record, and I was vaguely aware of him just because of my friendship with Tommy. When we got him in the band, we had another producer, writer, engineer guy like me, so it wasn't just me working at it. And him and I, wrote a couple of songs together, and it started to be, this is kind of cool. And it just kind of went from there. And it took us about a year or two before we had enough material so we could go, okay, we got enough for a record now. Should we make a record? And then we decided, yeah, we have enough good songs. Now we had about 20 songs. We pared it down to 10. So we had to, at that point, we came up with, okay, if we put out a record, what are we going to do? Are we going to put out some modern thing, like everybody else does? I mean, we didn't want to sound like Nickelback or one of those bands. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but it'd be funny with a bunch of older guys doing that stuff, right?
Yeah.
So and the other thing is, what would fit into the show we do now, stylistically? And one of the great things about the songs we chose is half the time when we play them, we play 3 or 4 in the set. Before the record came out, anyways, people would thought they were old songs anyway. You know what I mean? Because they didn't know any better. Because it sounded like, yeah, that could have been something from long ago. Now, of course, now that the record's out, the fans know the difference. But the final piece in the puzzle for me, though, is when Rudy joined, Rudy Sarzo.
Yeah. Because
what Rudy brought was, first of all, he's a legend in that world, because just based on his work with Ozzy, Quiet Riot, Whitesnake, and the list goes on and on. So having somebody of that caliber in your band, and he brought such a huge lift to the live show in his playing. It was, let's put it this way, when he joined, we were like, this is it. Mm-hmm. This is the band that we're going to go forward with. It was, and Jim had decided to retire, which is the reason Rudy got in the band in the first place.
Okay.
Right. So, and one of the reasons Jim decided to retire is because it was just getting too hard on him. The travel, the exhaustion of the whole thing. Mm-hmm. He probably would have loved to do the playing part, but he's 75 years old. And, let's put it this way. I get home sometimes and I feel like a truck hit me, and it takes me a few days to recover. So I can't even imagine what it's like for those guys, right?
Yeah, I mean, for Gary and Rudy, they've got to be like pretty much built for this type of life at this point.
Well, yeah, and Leonard's 65. You know what I mean? Nobody's that young. I mean, Will's the youngest. He's the only one in his 40s. But still, it's that kind of travel for anybody is hard. So when your joints start, yelling back at you, it just gets a bit harder.
Oh, easily.
Yeah.
So,
but that's what I would say. Now that we had Rudy, everybody just knew that this was the way to go.
After that final piece, joined in 2016, it just clicked, and you guys all right, now we got to get into the studio, and now we can. Well, no, we had already recorded some of the songs before Rudy joined. Yeah.
Because we had decided to make the record, but it was when Rudy joined that we knew that it was the right thing. What happened is, before Rudy's name came up, Michael Devon was subbing in, and I don't know if you know him, but he's the bass player for Whitesnake. Okay. And he was a friend. So he came and did some shows, so he flew in to play some of the bass parts at Blackbird. So he's on about 5 or 6 of the cuts. Mm-hmm. And it was just after that because we knew that Michael wasn't going to be in the band because he's already in another band. And it was just after that Rudy's name came up, and we asked him to be in the band, and he accepted. And luckily we still had a few songs left to record. Mm-hmm. So he was on the record. But it was evident from the first show he played that this was the band. I guess that's my point. Okay. It's an unspoken thing, but when you get 5 people on the stage, and you just feel like it's butter. You trust them implicitly. You know after a while what everybody's going to do. You stay out of each other's way, and you make a show together. Once Rudy came in, you guys still had a few songs to record. How much of a hand did he have in the process of those songs, and did those songs change once he became a piece of them? They changed in the way of his style of playing. The drums had already been recorded. Okay. And what would happen is when Will and I did our demos, one of us would play bass, or just kind of a sketch bass part, just to outline the idea of just to get your idea across. Yeah. But of course, when Rudy played his own thing, it wouldn't have been what I would have done or what Will would have done. He's a real bass player, and he's got his own style, so that injected itself into the music. His tone, I have a feeling like When We Were Young may have been one of those songs, because I have a feeling like his tone really comes through in that. Well, it's interesting because the tone has a bit to do with Jim Scott, the mixer, as well, because Jim really tried to. He didn't try to do anything. He just did what he's good at, and that's vintage mixing. He doesn't do recall. He mixes things, old school. But I don't think Rudy played on that song. I'm pretty sure that was Michael, When We Were Young. Oh, wow. But both of those guys are from the heavy rock world. So that's probably it's the style of playing that they do. They're both in heavy rock bands, right? Whereas the Guess Who, in its day, was more of a pop act. Yes, it definitely was. Maybe not in an album track way, but if all the songs that everybody knows, like Laughing, Undone, those songs, there's songs you would have heard on AM radio as opposed to FM, right? So I would say the songs that we put out, for the most part, maybe would be a little more on the FM side, but they're still poppy. I mean, to me, it's subjective. It's a matter of opinion. You may think one thing, and I'll think another. Because I don't really know. Oh, and who really does? Yeah, exactly. Well, anyone who says they do clearly has no idea. You said it, not me. I'm happy to say it. Awesome. Yeah, okay, no problem. Getting the album together, mixing it, processing it, once you guys actually have it in your hand as a band, you guys are ready, how do you go about actually putting the release out and everything? Because this is
the first Guess Who album, actual Guess Who album since what, 95?
Yeah, a lot. And it's the first major release in 30 years or 25 years or something.
Yeah.
Because there's been a couple of independents along the way, but this is the first major release. But if you notice, we were very careful, even with the album cover. I remember Gary and I looking at these old shots, because, you know, I have a pretty old album collection at home, and looking at old album covers like The Ventures and stuff like that, where the bands were always in action on the cover. Mm-hmm. Do you know what I mean by that?
Yes.
Most records that came out back then were always an action shot of the singer singing or the band jumping up and down or whatever they were doing, which is why we did that. The cover shot ended up being a still from playing on the radio video. That was the intent. Mm-hmm. So everything down to the last detail was kind of a vintage thing. We had these two guys, Peter Wark and Ron Stone, Gold Mountain, that were working with us that helped promote. They secured the record deal with Cleopatra, and they set up the whole campaign. So we had third-party help getting all that stuff off the ground, because we're musicians and, you know, we don't really know what to do. I knew Peter previously, and I knew he was pretty dialed in with things. So when he came to the table, it was really helpful in getting to that part.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. Well, it's always good to have somebody to handle paperwork, organizational side of things, because
for sure. And the thing with Peter is he's younger. He was in his late 30s at the time. You know, and he's got more of a grasp on how the music business works now. Where the rest of us, you know, even myself, I know how it works. I've put out quite a few records in the last 10 years with various people. I know how it works. Mm-hmm. But I still have one foot in the old paradigm, which I know logically it doesn't exist. But it's hard to break out of that. You know what I mean? It's hard to get into that headspace of there's no radio. There's no record companies, really, not in the way there were when I started. Mm-hmm. You know, nobody's financing anything. You have to do all the work yourself, even when you sign with a label.
Oh, yeah, no, they can help with A&R and PR and stuff, but even then, like a lot of the time, it's you're funding a lot of the recording
for
videos
sure.
And everything
and you're
else.
doing crowdfunding. You're doing crowdfunding and whatever it takes to get to where you want to go. But you need, you know, you have to have kind of a fresh perspective on things to be able to do that. So yeah, that was very helpful. We were lucky to have people like that in our corner to bring those things to light. And like I said, and then to get to work with Nigel Dick and these other people, and Jim Scott and Richard Dodd, who mastered the record, all these legendary people. It was just, it was a wonderful experience from top to bottom from that perspective, for sure.
Was there any challenges or difficulties with the recording and releasing of the album, given the state of the music industry currently?
Sure, of course. I think anybody can say that. The challenge is having people, creating an awareness when you're a needle in this giant haystack. Mm-hmm. Now, I mean, it was like that before, but to me it's even more so now, because you put your song up on Spotify or Apple Music, and there's gazillions of new releases every week, if you've noticed. So what makes you so special? You know what I mean? For us, we had to just build it on our strengths. One is that we play to a lot of people every year. So there's a live component, and there's people that come to see us play, right? Mm-hmm. You have those people, and you'll sell your product, at the shows. So they're aware of it, and through social media and this and that. But, to me, it's essential to build a new audience every time you attempt this, because that's the key to longevity. If you just play, to the same people of your vintage, then eventually they're going to be too old to go and see you. just like the musicians. And it's, it's surprising how many young people actually come and see us play. I don't have an explanation for that, but that's the idea. And to me, the promoting something new involves thinking outside of the box. And I know that sounds cliche, and I don't even know how to explain that, but it's definitely a big factor in how you're going to present anything new in this day and age.
Mm-hmm.
If you look like other bands doing it, like they're coming out with their own tequila and stuff like that, everybody's looking for different ways of being noticed.
Yeah, it's definitely true, is they're always trying to figure out some way of grabbing someone's attention that other people haven't gotten around to yet.
Yeah, but at the end of the day, these are just some songs that we like and we hope people enjoy, and they'll come out to see us and expect to hear those songs. And that, to a certain degree, has already been achieved.
Well, that's fantastic to hear, especially for a band that has been around for this long.
Yeah, like we go out and sign autographs after the shows sometimes. Just based on the feedback that we've gotten so far, is most people are aware of it. So that's challenge number one. Some of them are even singing along with the songs already, which is challenge number two. So, and you just keep going. You build it one show at a time. That's all you can do.
I know that you guys just released this album. There's probably some more tour dates ahead and everything else, but what does the future hold for the Guess Who beyond this new album?
More, I guess. That would be the simplest answer. I mean, the touring aspect, we never stop. It hasn't stopped since I joined, and it's not about to stop anytime soon. Mm-hmm. We still play to however many people a year. I don't even know the number, but it's got to be in the 500,000 range, I would suppose. Depending on if we do a tour or not, or we're promoting this, we're promoting that. We do at least 40 shows, in a year. It's just this ongoing thing. So I guess the next step for this band would be just to keep going. Mm-hmm. We already, don't forget, Will and I are both we're constantly writing new songs because we're songwriters, even for other people. So we don't really have a shortage of material. Now, whether it's the right material is obviously a concern, but at this point, now that we've done this record and we got it out of the way, and we there were quite a few challenges with it, of course, because we were going into new territory. I think we have a bit of a better idea how to approach it if we want to do it again. So it would go a lot faster. So I guess the answer you're looking for is, if we did another record, it would happen sooner than later.
All right, awesome to hear.
But the next year really is about this one.
Yes.
So that's what we'll be touring on for 2019. We'll be on the strength of The Future Is What It Used to Be.
Well, fantastic. Hopefully I can catch you guys somewhere in support of the album.
That would be awesome.
I agree with that. All right, I think I have one more question for you.
No worries.
All right, so I've got a little bit of a background here on the song playing on the radio. So as someone who grew up in the age, like the strength of radio and the AM and the FM and everything else, you've said you'd tune in just to hear the songs over and over again, and like the characters in the song could be like any one of you. As someone who grew up probably listening the Guess Who on the radio, how much were they inspiring you, and how much were those tunes mean to you growing up?
That's a great question, but very difficult to answer because, and I've been asked this question before.
Yes.
Those songs are just part of the fabric of Canadian radio. So I would have had to live under a rock not to know them.
Yeah.
Number one. Okay? But at the age I was at when those songs were, I was in my I was a young guy approaching into my teenage years. I loved so much music. I didn't really have one influence because it was all the same to me.
Yes.
So where I can't say, I grew up, like I was in, the Guess Who inspired me. It was, the music certainly would have, but in a more global sense. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
I mean, I don't really have a favorite band. I loved the Beatles, of course, but everybody did, because they were the exception to the rule.
How can't you?
How can't you? But then again, how do you rate these other bands, including the Guess Who? To me, we're still listening to these songs 50 years later. They've stood the test of time, as with the Rolling Stones, as with bands like Steely Dan, if you want to get into that kind of thing. Or I mean, I could go on and on and on, obviously. And to me, Rudy puts it best. He said, we're the last bastion of this classic rock, era. The last people that were there when it happened, per se, this old paradigm. Which is why he wrote his book. I don't want to get too off topic here, but which is why he wrote his book and told the story of his experience with Randy Rhoads, because people ask him about it all the time. Mm-hmm. And once, Rudy's like, once I'm gone, there'll be nobody left to tell the story. And I think that's important to say here, that the current band, basically, once Gary's gone, that'll be it.
Yeah.
That'll be it. Then the next generation will be the rest of us who's ever left, to the point where, once it's gone, it's gone. So I think it's wonderful that a lot of these old bands are still out there playing, because we play with them all the time, and I could list them all. Like, these guys trotting out, and they're in their 70s, and some of them are in better shape than young people, the serious ones. But if you could just, take a second and look at the people's faces when they're listening to this timeless music, you would understand why we keep doing it. It makes people happy.
Yes.
End of story.
Just the emotions.
And what does music remind you of? It's the soundtrack to your life. And the Guess Who catalog, or a lot of these songs, are the soundtrack to those people's lives.
And
whether it's yours or just the memories. You know what I mean? And the music that you listen to, creates your own memory, whoever that is. Who would be one of your favorite bands? You got any?
Oh, wow. I think Iron Maiden.
Hard question, isn't it?
Iron Maiden is like the number one. That's just like my easy answer, number one. But yes, it's a super hard question.
That's a good answer, though, because those guys are I would rate them very high on the list, especially in the hard rock. And I actually saw them back in the day, and I can confirm that they were one of the greatest live acts you've ever seen.
Well, I got to see them almost 10 years ago, and even then, still
exactly
amazing.
Exactly. So what does that tell you? That's what I mean. These guys know what they're doing. And I'm not being egotistical at all by saying that. It's just life experience. These guys know what to do. They've done it thousands and thousands and thousands of times, as is the rest of us. Why wouldn't you want to go see that? And listen to some music that you're somewhat familiar with, but just a good band. Nobody's staring at the floor. People, we're reacting with the audience. It's an experience. Live music is one of the few things left that you just can't replicate on the internet.
Yeah, I love that.
You have to agree that watching a video of a band on YouTube is not even in the same sentence as going to a show.
Not even close.
No, exactly. And in some ways, to me, YouTube videos almost taint the experience because it makes it seem like it's less than it really is. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Definitely. It doesn't nearly capture the energy of the audience or the room or anything.
Exactly. Not to mention the sound and the people around you and the vibe. You're sitting in your living room looking at a video on your phone. I mean, how can you compare that to this big experience? So I would say, get out and see more live shows.
I agree.
Turn off your phone and go out and see a show. You won't regret it.
Netflix will still be there.
They'll still be there in the morning, yeah. Or when you get home, when you're hungover and you're 3 fingers in.
Yeah, exactly. Needing to unwind a little bit and the room's spinning.
That's right. Yeah.
It'll still be there for you.
Yeah.
This has been a fantastic conversation, Derek. Thank you so much.
Oh, my pleasure. I'm trying to download things as you're asking. I did my best.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your experiences and your journey with me.
Oh, no problem. It's my pleasure. I hope to speak to you again sometime.
I hope so as well. And with that being said, there has been a lot of laughing here in this episode. So before things become undone and these eyes begin to cry and I look like a dancing fool, I want to go ahead and thank Derek Sharp for joining me here on this week's episode of the show and sharing all the information behind the Guess Who's new album, The Future Is What It Used to Be. I also want to go ahead and thank EA, Mr. Eric, for going ahead and setting this interview up. You guys have heard me drop the name before. The man has given us tons of great episodes in the past, and we are forever thankful to 1EA for doing that. And I also want to go ahead and thank you guys, the listeners of the Desert Tiger podcast, for tuning in to this episode. Hopefully you guys can catch the Guess Who supporting their new album live somewhere close to you, so that hopefully you won't be caught running back to Saskatoon in order to share the land with the fellow concert goers and all of those bus riders that you had to travel with in order to get there. So go ahead, give yourself a big round of applause and clap for the Wolfman. If you guys enjoyed this episode of the podcast, it would make me ecstatic if you went ahead and rated or reviewed the show on iTunes, or even shared this episode on your social media with your friends and your family, because like I said earlier, that really actually does help this show grow like exponentially. So thank you to all of you that do that. Next week on the show, my guest is going to be like a motorcycle. I know I said that they were going to be on the show a long time ago, but it is finally happening next Thursday, like a motorcycle, right here on the Desert Tiger podcast. I will see you here. So until then, have yourself a fantastic time.